Good morning, everybody. What's that for an entrance, eh? It's interesting I'm talking about technology because my GPS screwed me up and basically sent me to 695 Hunter College, Park Avenue. So, all right, thanks for having me. I'm glad I actually did make it on time. I'm going to talk today a little bit about the future. I think this is something, and this is a great program that you've thrown together, I believe, which is very innovative and is talking very forward-thinking and practical, talking about how we can use technology to make transportation more efficient, safe, and I think the rest of the program that Hong Yang put together is we're going to be going into the weeds on how we actually do things. I was asked to talk a little bit about public policy, which is something that I've been living and breathing for the last 16 years, having worked for government for so long. But it's interesting to be in academia now and to be out on the other side and kind of see things a little bit differently. And it's been a very rewarding experience for me. Doing a lot of research in the area. Since I've been at the UTRC, where I see Penny here and Nadia. We have a great staff. We're one of the 10 regional research facilities across the United States that the US DOT has selected for innovative research, including technology, through RITA. And we have a great group of people in our consortium that are doing a lot of work and a lot of analysis of some of the GPS data that we've been collecting on taxi cabs. And really the sky's the limit. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But I'm also going to talk about how things have been speeding up and happening so quickly over the last 2 years. Since I've left government, it's been a whirlwind of technological change virtually overnight. And I think that's going to continue, and it's going to continue accelerating over the next year or so. So the big question is, what's going to happen? What is the next big thing? How everything is going to play out? And how we can use data, and big data, which is a new term which is being thrown around out there, to manage transportation systems and make them better. And we start with taxi cabs. Well, anyway, I guess you covered all this, right? So I did my time in city government working in a lot of different positions, but 14 years were spent at the TLC. I started out as special counsel in charge of the judges, then I became general counsel. Proud to have reformed the system in '98. If some of you who are old enough to remember, there was a taxi strike in 1998. That was my fault. But the good news is that all those rules passed. We won every lawsuit, and the entire system in New York City became better. I don't think anyone could say that there's not a better system now than there was when Robert De Niro appeared in the movie Taxi Driver. But it's become the gold standard around the country and around the world. And right now, after the last 10, 15 years of regulation, and even continuing to date with my successor's work, New York City continues to be the city that everybody looks to, not just taxis, but in other forms of other industries and other regulation. There's a work, we'll replicate it where we're going. So that was a real fun trip. One of the big things that I did there, which I will talk about under Mayor Bloomberg's tenure, was really focus on customer service, which had never really been done before in the history of the TLC. I mean, we were playing such catch-up for many, many years, regulating taxis and limos and making sure that they were safe, and it wasn't until the late 90s that we really got that under control. Throughout the 2000s, and when I was working for Mayor Bloomberg, we were focusing on technology, GPS, credit cards. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. Hybrid vehicles, making service better, which was something that most regulators around the world don't have the luxury of doing. Now it's starting to change, as the big picture is that tourism industries and mayors in cities around the world are realizing, you know what, if the first and last face that you see when you come to a city isn't that pleasant, or the first trip that you take from the airport isn't that safe, or doesn't feel safe, everybody suffers. How do you bid on a Super Bowl? How do you bid on a big event? How do you sit down with your Convention and Visitors Bureau and justify having a beautiful city with all sorts of great destinations, but the cab system stinks? So that's the big picture. So what we're seeing is a lot of reform in the taxi industry. We did it in '98 here. We were one of the first. But now Chicago did it last year, New Orleans, San Francisco. Cities around the world are realizing we need to fix this. And what's going to speed up that fix is technology. And we're going to talk a lot about it because technology is going to make it easier with limited resources that government has to get things done. So I do I teach a couple of courses at City College. I teach Sustainable Transportation, American Transportation History, and the first ever course, I believe, in the history of the United States through a UTRC for taxi and limousine policy. We have a couple of PhD students, mostly graduate engineers, but a lot of different graduate students. And I'm also, my other hat is I'm the president of the IETR, the International Association of Transport Regulators. The IETR is basically a nonprofit group that does education and advocacy on behalf of government taxi commissioners and regulators. So after leaving, I'm still working with the regulators, representing their interests around the world, and we do, symposia. We actually have a lot of UTRC professors and CUNY professors that are doing work in the area, and they come to our conferences. We have an academic committee that's working closely with the Transportation Research Board. We've established the first ever committee on taxi studies, because it's really virtually until today, and in the last couple of years, a glut or a lack of appropriate studies compared to other transportation modes. So we're trying to get full committee status, but now it's a subcommittee of the Paratransit Committee. But at least the people that do the research in the government on the federal level are realizing that there's a body of work here, and this underappreciated mode could really play a role in a lot of different solutions. All right, so let's go back to the beginning. There's a handsome cab. We started out with horses. First there was the wheel, okay, that predated that photo. There's a cab stand at Madison Square in New York City around the 1900s. And for those of you who are into automobile history, a lot of people don't even realize that we had electric cabs. They were the first cabs that we had out there. And then we covered this in my course, actually. One of the big reasons why we don't have electric cabs is because of World War II. And when Edison and Mr. Ford were actually working together to make all their cabs be electric, and some of the prototypes didn't work, the war intervened, and everybody realized we need fast petroleum fuel vehicles that are out there, and that was the beginning of the end. And then when the Cold War came, obviously we had the Federal Highway Act, and everybody was doing investment in vehicles, and the technology in the Model T led us to a petroleum-fueled society, but it could have gone a different way. So that was the first technology installed in a cab. It was the electric cab called the Electrobat. The first taximeter was invented by Wilhelm Brunn in 1891. Though they're pretty heavy. I've seen actually some of these later model meters, including this one, the Argo taximeter. This thing is heavy. Okay, it takes about 2 people to lift it. And that's on the left. That's a flag. People used to talk about the flag being up or down. And for those of you who study taxi history, some of the earliest technology also was something called a hot seat, where when it was a commission system years ago, there was a device that was able to judge whether there's somebody sitting in the back seat, so that the fleet owners were making sure that the cabbies weren't ripping them off. And that was something that was a part of ancient taxi history. But the world has changed. Technology is rampant. I'm proud to have been a part of introducing the first technology to New York City taxi cabs. But I have to say, even the things that I started here with the mayor when I was working at TLC are already updated. It's unfortunate, but and I was a little upset when I found out that a little over 2 years after putting the systems in the cabs with the which I'll describe in a minute, the GPS and the television monitors, that Boston had, even better models than we had, within 2 years. But that has been far surpassed by the things that have been happening with smartphones and payment processing, which we're going to get into. So TPEP, as we fondly call it, is the Taxi Passenger Enhancement Program. We started this program as a result of a 2004 fare increase. Usually regulators, when they implement fare increases, it's very important to make sure that politically the public is able to get something in exchange for paying more in the rate of fare. So at the time, one of the things that we actually looked at was this system. It was in various stages of development and discussion, and we actually, when the mayor supported the fare increase, this was the give back to the people. It includes global positioning systems, passenger information monitors, those are the screens in the back. There's something called a DIM, the driver information monitor. That's a monitor that is up front, very similar to a digital dispatch equipment that has been in black cars and limousines for many, many years, and credit and debit card swipers. And some of them are RFID with radio frequency IDs where you can just tap and go, just like Exxon's cards when you go to the gas station. A lot of people don't even know that. But most of the cabs, you can just, if you have a tap and go card, you can just tap it across the screen. And this has been a project which, some of you may remember that the cab drivers tried to pull off a strike. I had the big inflatable rat in front of my office. I had to come home from an ITR conference. They couldn't get it together. They didn't actually have the strike. They had some people rallying outside the office, but they forgot that they agreed to this. It took 2 years to implement it because we have procurement laws and we have to, you know, it was an innovative procurement, which means that we weren't actually giving city money to them, but we were restricting competition to a few companies and passing rules to do that, and we chose from a large number of vendors, just a couple, knowing that maybe 1 or 2 might go under, which is kind of what happened. So that is two vendors left, Verifone and Creative Mobile Technologies. But the bottom line is that the service got even better as time went on. By doing that model, it drove the price of everything down. Okay, so we had these 4 vendors at the initial stage competing. Unlike, you know, Taxi and Tomorrow, we also debated. You may have been reading about that in the papers. At the time, we debated: do we do an exclusive contract before it went out, or do we do multiple vendors? I mean, one of the things that did work with this procurement is that it did drive the prices down because there was fierce competition between the 4 vendors. Be that as it may, after New York City did it, there's various cities like Chicago and somewhat San Francisco and Boston, these devices started appearing in other cities. And it's become an international sales model for these companies. They're trying to introduce this technology, but a lot of people don't have the tolerance for all the things that we did in New York. And we had a mandate, we forced everybody to put it in, and the cab drivers forgot that they got all this money, the biggest fare increase in the history of the city of New York at the time. We gave them a living wage. They conveniently forgot 2 years later that it was in exchange for this. And they were complaining about issues involving privacy and so forth. And that's something that, let me make sure I got the right time here. I got 10:10.
You have half
I have a half hour? Okay. Okay. So anyway, these are the benefits of the program. There were bits and pieces of it here and there. We fully integrated the system into one platform. The drivers get business opportunities. I don't know if that's fully been implemented as it will be in the future, but bottom line is if there's a cruise ship coming in Red Hook, Brooklyn, which is a little bit out of the way, you could actually alert the cab drivers that are in the area through GPS to say there's a business opportunity, and on their DIM they'll get a little note that says there's a cruise ship coming in at the terminal. So it works, and whether you're having a big event and you need cabs, or at the Javits Center, those capabilities exist. Emergency and other information, I mean, you know, if there's an emergency, God forbid, in the city and we need to deploy the cabs or tell them where to go and what to do, they have emergency contact information. Passengers benefit from the return of lost property. Used to be a needle in a haystack search where we'd be calling people. Now you just got to tell us generally where you are, and the systems can actually narrow down without even having the medallion number or a receipt, you know, who might have it. We could send a message to the driver, which the TLC's been doing, and you know, they'll get a message on their screen. Do you have a diamond ring in the back of your cab, or a prosthetic leg, which was once lost, or Yo-Yo Ma's cello, which was also lost in a cab. I don't know how you lose a cello in a cab, but convenience. It's easier to tip. You know, people would tip in the past based upon the denominations of cash they had in their wallet. If you didn't have a nice round number, most passengers would undercut the drivers. This trip sampling indicated it was maybe 10 or 12%. You know, it's much higher than that. The GPS data when I was there showed it was close to 20%. And if you look at the preset screens, it says 15%, 25%, 30%, whatever it says. So there's a tip calculator, which is great for customers. And I think, basically, credit card usage gradually grew up to over 50%. News, advertising, government information, people like it or they don't like it. There's some cool things going on now. There's trivia, you know, there's my successor is actually on there all the time talking about new initiatives, and it's a great way to communicate with the people. But the reason why we're here today is to talk about data collection. Okay, something which hasn't been fully realized as of yet, but has a tremendous amount of potential. Now, we've heard of big data. I think big data is something that needs to be defined, but it is, in my view, the future. Okay, you know, you may have heard of NYU's CUSP, of which CUNY is a part of, where there's a new center that's going to be taking all sorts of data from government and all different agencies and analyzing them for purposes of making policy. But how is it defined? We've heard the term. It's a collection of data sets so large and complex that it becomes difficult to process using on-hand database management tools or traditional data processing applications. The challenges include capture, curation, storage, search, sharing, transfer, analysis, and visualization. This is a problem we had from the onset with TPEP. We have over 600,000 trips per day. Okay, we can't even house the information on our servers at the government. In fact, a lot of the data is at the CUNY supercomputer, and that's where various professors and myself tap into the data. You just need a big supercomputer. You know, so here's some examples of big data, you know, storage and then the various applications, you know, medical records, military surveillance. I'm sure what big science is, but you know, those are some of this is the future. Where are we going to store it? And of course, you know, you see some clouds there. You know, they have these server farms, you know, and everyone talks about you know, information going into the cloud. I mean, I didn't really fully understand that until I realized that all my photos on my iPhone are somewhere in space somewhere that you know, other people have access to my phone can pull down, so you got to be careful what you have on there. How does big data affect ground transportation and its technology? In a number of ways. I think data and its use and analysis all relates to how we're going to apply it as well. We're going to get improved taxi service out of technology. We're going to have smart taxis. There are going to be ways, and people are working on this now, to develop algorithms so that cab drivers could realize where their next fare might be in New York, based upon prior data, huge sets of data, that time of day, place, you know, trending, where possibly a device which tells a cab driver, turn left, turn right at this time of day, you've got a better chance of getting a fare. Content, location-based advertising, this is already happening. In the back of the cabs with the TPEP system, you know, as you're passing by a Starbucks or by Bloomingdale's, you know, there's a sale going on today, and it pops up on the screen. I mean, we're already seeing that on your smartphones. And the integration of TPEP and apps. And we'll talk a little bit about apps, but everything is going to kind of, you know, meld together, in my view, when it comes to technology. And the more melding there is, the more data there is, and there needs to be a place to store it. In terms of transportation planning, now this is what you're here for, and this is what we're here to talk about. And I gave a speech at the US DOT at RITA last November, and a lot of people were floored about the possibilities, and I'm sure you will be too, that all this taxi data can be used for broader transportation planning, which we'll get into. The collection analysis could analyze traffic patterns, which could help with road planning for DOTs, state and local, real-time traffic information. The taxis can really contribute to that a lot. In terms of law enforcement, there are a lot of commissions right now that don't have much law enforcement, and government's a cash-strapped. In order for there to be an effective ground transportation system, you need to have enforcement officers. The industry may not like it, but the reality is that these are administrative agencies. They have a lot more leeway. The rules of hearsay don't apply. You don't have to have, you could actually submit affidavits in support of violations and summonses as opposed to an officer appearing in person. That opens up a world of opportunities for regulators to actually send summonses in the mail. People may not like that, but the reality is that you could take a force of 2 enforcement officers and increase it to 2,000 in terms of your scope by using the data that you collect from the cabs. You could ascertain by going through a transponder unit in some of the new technology that's out there whether a cab is about to emit harmful emissions beyond what is allowed by law. You can immediately send them a summons in the mail or a notice directing them to appear at an inspection facility. Okay, with all this street hail law that's being debated and the e-hailing, you know, we've heard about e-hailing with these smartphone meters. There are rules that apply to them that need to be enforced, and you could geo-fence cabs and look at a computer to see if they're staying in the areas they're supposed to if these laws go through. You know, some cities, some cabs are allowed in certain areas but not in others, and they have different classifications of vehicles. There's a tremendous potential to keep people honest and solve a lot of enforcement problems. Of course, fraud, you know, we've had situations where cab drivers are manipulating the meter. I actually, you know, was responsible for putting some people in jail for actually zapping the meter with little electronic devices that go into the pulse of it. There's a lot of fraud that occurs, and technology can help prevent that. Now, Professor David King from Columbia and John Peters from Staten Island, we've worked together on a lot of different analyses of this data. And this is just an example of some of the data sets that are out there. You know, you could see, which is no surprise, there's a lot of origins of cab trips in green in various parts of Manhattan, but there's a lot of destinations are outside of Manhattan, believe it or not. Here are some origins. As you can see, most of the origins again are Manhattan, and you could do it by volume and the number of trips, and you could also map the destinations. As you can see, that's where people go. The data can tell you so many different things. In particular, here's just one example of how you could take a look at what traffic speeds are. When the mayor and the DOT commissioner actually were justifying the success of the pedestrian plazas, the first use of real taxi data was data that came from our TPEP system to show that the cabs actually, I think the conclusion was it wasn't speeding up traffic. Traffic was slowed. But still, you know, it was a good thing for the economy to have these pedestrian plazas. But the data was analyzed, and you could actually, it's a great tool for DOT traffic engineers and planners to see what the speed of the cabs are, because in a central business district that's highly congested, that's the speed of the other vehicles too. So there's tremendous opportunity there. This is the issue. Big Brother, 1984, George Orwell. The past was dead, the future was unimaginable. This is an issue that's facing all of us and this particular topic. It's the biggest issue. I'm going to just breeze through this, but there are privacy issues. I mean, they were raised. I guess the good news is that when it comes to criminal issues, okay, when people are being charged with crimes, there's a very different standard than using GPS data from cabs or otherwise for regulatory purposes. And the two issues of the Fourth Amendment, you know, you have a protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. You know, case law has been all over the place, going all the way up to the Supreme Court. You know, you really need to get a search warrant to start putting a GPS sensor on someone's car if you're following them. But, you know, there's a big distinction in a recent case, which isn't on here. I think it's U.S. versus Jones, where you know, the cops put a GPS sensor on a car, and there's a distinction between it being on the public roads and it being parked in someone's driveway. You have a right and a reasonable expectation of privacy in your driveway. You need a search warrant. But when you're on the public roads, you know, you're not entitled to that privacy right. Of course, the cab drivers sued me in 2007. I won, and the TLC and the city won. And the court concluded that, based on prior decisions as well, in a civil context, us using GPS data for all the different things that I mentioned is okay. There's an intermediate level of scrutiny, which means that our substantial interest in requiring GPS and mandating it for the cabs outweighed privacy rights, because we had a governmental interest in promoting taxi customer service, ridership, and passenger and driver safety. And, you know, most importantly, it reiterated prior case law that said that there's no legitimate expectation of privacy when you're on the public streets in the vehicle, okay? That's basically it. There's no expectation of privacy when you're in a cab. You know, even though if you happen to jump into a cash cab or something like that, they make you sign agreements. The reality is that you're on a public street and you're in a public conveyance. There's something also called the takings clause. You know, you've heard of eminent domain maybe. You know, you can't just, you know, walk into an area like Atlantic Yards or whatnot, or go to, you know, build the Barclays Stadium, but actually, you know, going through a legal process of taking the property and paying just compensation to the people that own it. There's also a case law that says a pervasive regulation could be what's called a regulatory taking, that you regulated something so much that you've taken a private business and basically rendered it devoid of value. Okay, those are some arguments that were raised, and in Philadelphia, they, after, on or about the time that we were doing this, Philadelphia did a centralized dispatch system, and they were sued, and they won. And again, the court ruled that the Philadelphia Parking Authority, which regulates cabs, had rules involving GPS and dispatch systems that were for the public good and promoted hospitality and tourism. And that was the same thing that happened in the case that we got called Alexander in New York. So the lessons learned is that there's a difference between criminal and civil use of data, GPS data, in taxi cabs and I believe it applies in all forms of public transportation, in my view. Government regulators should clearly define how they're using the data and define via regulation and or contract how they're going to do it to preserve privacy interests. We really didn't want off-duty data for taxi cabs. I don't think we really care where a driver goes off-duty. But that is an unresolved issue. Can we track those cars using taxi GPS data for law enforcement investigations? I will tell you that there's been at least one terrorist attack that has been stopped as a result of a major terrorist attack as a result of our GPS data. Okay, and I think it's actually public now. Zazi and the folks that were actually arrested in that Queens apartment building were a direct result of subpoenas that were sent to the TLC for this data. Okay, so this has saved lives, not just on the road, but in terms of criminal investigations. It hasn't been tested in the courts, though. I believe law enforcement has the right to get your cell phone data. They have the right to get the taxi data if there's a legitimate criminal investigation, but I think it's pretty clear that they need to have a subpoena or a warrant. The passenger tolerance of privacy issues is really the big question. Forget about what the law says. Okay, we all know if we watch what's going on with Facebook and their privacy policies, just because the law says you can get the data doesn't necessarily mean that customers and passengers will tolerate it. Okay, people don't, there's a big thing going on now with a Bloomberg LP, and people are concerned that, data is being used for purposes that they never envisioned. Look, I think at some point in time, either different contexts, different industries, people, I think, are going to get more accustomed to it. If they feel that there's a buy-in, that they're going to benefit from it. But nobody, including myself, wants to be watched. We don't want to be watched. We don't want somebody sitting at another terminal saying, well, what is he looking at on the internet? But if there's a way to, and this is key with this information, as we get more involved in taxi technology, it's going to be very, very important to figure out how we shield and protect that privacy data to make sure passengers will use smartphones, will use their credit cards, and not be concerned that there's somebody in some TLC office somewhere or some clerk who's looking at some documents that they shouldn't be. So here's what the future is going to bring, in my opinion. We're going to have big data. There's no question that there's going to be data, and there's more of it in the taxi and transportation context. It's going to be analyzed, and it's going to be put to incredible uses. The taxi tomorrow, oh boy, whether it's dead or not, is new technology, which is going to be integrated. Everything is going to be integrated together. I think taxi meters are going to be a thing of the past. And it's just a matter of time before the computers in the cars with mobile technology will send information to a cloud, which will come down to your phone or to the back of the cab, and there will be an actual virtual taxi meter. It's just a matter of time. Are you going to get more advertising in the cabs, exterior and interior digital displays? Payment processing is going to be done on smartphone apps. Pads, you'll see some pads and screens possibly in the back of cars. Black boxes, which we'll talk a little about. Onboard diagnostics, which is the computer in the car. Okay, that's the key. Every car has a computer. It has data. The federal government is actually looking to tap into that and is looking to encourage manufacturers to have even more data. It's just a matter of time before we all tap into it and figure out how we can make the roads safer and make insurance rates come down. Panic buttons, GPS, and regulated dashboards. And what I mean by that is regulators that are regulating transportation services looking at a dashboard on a computer of where their vehicles are. It's already happening, okay, in various forms and stages. Now, apps, smartphone apps for cabs and for limos. As you can see, that's just a sampling of some of the crazy apps that are out there. I call them angry birds. They chirp and they fight with each other now, and now they're fighting with these rogue ride-sharing companies, which is just glorified hitchhiking without regulation, in my opinion. But there's some real good ones and ones that are, work well but are illegal, and there are ones that are also being made in someone's basement by a couple of college students every day. Not to knock college students, but there are ones that are legitimate, that have real backing, and there are ones that aren't. It's pretty simple. You download it. They're all free. You run the app. You locate a service. You book a vehicle. Some have payment processing. Others don't. They're pure just dispatch models, and you can actually see the cab coming towards you. And it's great. Consumers love it. The concept is brilliant. There are a bunch of legal and policy issues, which we won't spend too much time in because time's running short. But the laws that were created years ago to regulate taxi cabs just didn't contemplate that we'd be using smartphones. So regulators are up in arms, and there are companies that are disrupting the market, like they did in the music industry and the publishing business, to try to take licensed companies and say, hey, to hell with you. We're technology, rules don't apply to us. Well, we don't have to get into a debate about it, but the reality is that it's blurring the lines between what a taxi and a limo is. Somebody needs to be held accountable for safety and customer service. So, in my view, in the regulator's view, someone should be responsible if something goes wrong. If a vehicle doesn't have insurance, or a driver, has is DWI, or on drugs and gets into an accident, someone gets hurt. It's either that company that's a transportation company with the smartphone should be licensed, or whoever is doing business with them, if they're a licensed cab company, they should be held accountable. That's the big issue. And the last issue is, inside these smartphones is find my smartphone, never leaves my side. There is a taximeter, an unlicensed, unregulated, unapproved taximeter inside these smartphone apps. That's the biggest issue. I got lost today. It's probably a result of human error, to be honest with you, because I typed the wrong address into my calendar. But, everyone's gotten lost with GPS navigation software, right? You're off by a block. You're being overcharged. Passengers are being fleeced. Okay, put aside issues of surge pricing and supply and demand, where some companies were saying, okay, so there's less of a supply of cabs now, you're going to pay 5 times the price. I think that's crazy. I think that's price gouging. All right, but these are some of the legal issues. But the reality is that these apps are a good thing if they comply with the law. They solve all of our regulatory problems. You're going to get more efficient service and response times. You could actually use these apps to get service outside the central business district, which has been an ongoing issue for people like myself who live in Brooklyn. Peak demand service. Let's use every cab that's on the road. It's so difficult to get a cab during rush hour. Let's use it for some ride sharing, potentially, where people can hook up and use their smartphones to share rides potentially. Off-peak service. Come out of a club if you're a young person on the Lower East Side, and you're wandering around, can't get a cab in the middle of the night. It's dangerous out there sometimes. Walking down the wrong street. You hail the cab and it comes to wherever you are in some of these out-of-the-way nooks and crannies around the city. Licensed group riding, like I said, not illegal group riding or sham operations. Environmental benefits. The more cabs that are being utilized at all times, the better it is for the environment. Economic benefits for drivers and businesses, it's going to lead to more business, and all the benefits of TPEP and more. Black boxes, GPS, G-force events, okay, the car swerving to the left or the right is actually being used in a lot of fleets now, but we need more of it. There's a bill pending to allow from Senator Golden in the state to allow for a tax credit for these devices. They have front-facing and rear-facing cameras, so that if there's a near accident but not an accident, fleet managers can actually call the driver in and analyze data to make sure that that driver gets off the road or is fired, or his or her activity is corrected before there's an accident, before someone's killed. Across the board, companies that I've seen that have this data and have these systems have a 60% reduction in accidents across the board over a sustained period of time. Why the government's not mandating this, I don't know. It's Big Brother. People don't want to have red light cameras, but the reality is that hundreds of thousands of lives will be saved if we had this data in cars, and truck drivers and public transit drivers and taxi drivers, if they had this system, people's lives would be saved. Why don't we do it? There's a lot of reasons, but it is something which I think is the future. There's just a couple of the types of recorders that are out there. And they all come with software, okay? And that's very, very important too, to make sure that you have analytics. You could actually identify hotspots. Everybody's heard of Queens Boulevard, the former boulevard of death, you would say. You could look at this data and see where there are traffic problems which need to be addressed by the DOT. Well, paratransit, I won't spend too much time on it. Bottom line is that the system's broken. It's inefficient and bad for the environment for paratransit vans to be picking up, on average, 1 to 2 passengers in vans that seat 4 or 5. We need to use taxis or liveries to pick people up, point to point, and technology, in my opinion, is already underway. A pilot program I started with the MTA is being put into place permanently, okay, where taxi and livery brokers, not taxi brokers, but livery brokers, are going to be coordinating point-to-point trips for individuals who are disabled under Access-a-Ride. And it's been, not only is it going to save, if it's implemented around the country, it will save billions of dollars for transit agencies, but most importantly too, I'm doing a study now with UTRC, and we're basically proving that we'll reduce the ecological footprint of these services. All right, so the future's now for big data. Regulators, it's happening. The last point I will make is San Francisco. If you haven't heard, San Francisco is doing it. They have something called the Electronic Taxi Access System, which they just announced, where they are actually putting a system in place that's going to coordinate all of these different technologies that are out there. So with all these smartphone apps, everybody's got an app, right? Everything's going to integrate into one system. There's going to be one map that the regulator at San Francisco's MTA is going to look at. It's going to have every cab in the city for the first time on one map. And all of the data that they're going to get is amazing. They're going to put the consultants out of business. These economists that say, oh, well, you need this many more medallions and that many more medallions. There's no more guesswork involved. When you have a fare increase, you'll typically have a driver's group that says, oh, we're not making enough money. And the fleet owner's saying, oh, we have all these expenses. All of these issues are going to be settled. What people are making, what drivers are making, owners are making, is going to be completely transparent. Okay, supply and demand, how many taxis do you need? It's all going to be done by a push of a button. So the way it's going to work is, as you can see, the dispatch systems that are in San Francisco, the dispatch fleets that send the cabs are, and this is really where the problem started. San Francisco probably had not enough medallions out there, and we have all this big tech community, all these people that work in Silicon Valley that have money that they would like to spend to get a cab but can't get a cab. So they came up with all these concepts. A variety of different app companies started where they started using the smartphone apps to hail the cabs. Now they're all over the place. Okay, so how do you control this? How do you, prevent unfair competition and get them all under control? San Francisco has taken a unique step of entering into a contract with a vendor that's actually going to have all the APIs from all these apps feed into one system. All of the dispatch software that these dispatch companies, that the taxi companies have been using for years, feed into one system. And when you hail a cab, whether it's just by putting your hand up or by using a phone or by calling, all this data is going to go into one place and it's going to go into the cloud. Okay, because the servers over there can't handle it. So the opportunities are endless. Driver's identification is going to be established to make sure that there's a barcode on your license that when you get to the cab, it's not your cousin or your brother who's unlicensed driving the cab. The data to shift, the vehicle number, the medallion number, the number of passengers, the fares, all this information is going to be collected, and also including the mileage, it's just limitless. And what's it going to lead to? Better taxi availability. Right now, it's a mess. In San Francisco, when this contract is in place, okay, it's going to increase the ability for every cab to be utilized, and it's going to increase service. Now, the cab companies may not like it because, if they can't service a customer, their customer is going to be sent to somebody else. They kind of did that in Philadelphia with their dispatch system. People didn't like it, but this is different. This is going to be real-time supply, demand, and it's really going to be interesting to watch this unfold. I'm not sure what's going to happen right now. I believe people are raising some issues, but in my opinion, I think it's going to happen, and I think it's going to be replicated around the world. And the thing for transportation planners who don't do what I used to do, people who are involved in transportation policy for DOTs, this data is something you need to tap into. SFMTA is the only agency in the country that has taxis, which is, in my opinion, the right thing to do in retrospect, as part of a mass transit agency. They have bicycles, they have buses, they have subways. Everything is integrated, so taxis are now part of the intermodal mix, and they are a solution. They will get you from one mode to another, and they may be a superior mode when it comes to certain types of trips. That's what the future is all about. Thank you. Oh, okay. I hope I didn't talk too fast. I'm a Brooklyn guy, can't help myself.
Data is power. And from what I can see, the Taxi and Limousine Commission is using its control of this data in an unfair way. Can you do anything about that? A colleague of mine and I, colleagues at City College in Columbia, have been trying to get hold of the Taxi and Limousine Commission data on taxi trips for about 5 years. We know others have gotten it, but we've been unable to. Every time we go to the Taxi and Limousine Commission, I think we've met with you even once.
Mm-hmm.
We've
Yes.
had, yes,
But a year and a half ago.
more than that. We asked you for the data. You said yes, we'll see if you can get it. Since that time,
You mean when I was there?
yes.
Okay.
Since that time, we've seen other people get the data, but we haven't been able to get access to it. Are you using this data unfairly? Are you using it for your own benefit?
No, no, they'll be happy to give it out to you. I mean, at the beginning, when I was there.
They're not happy now. We've asked for it.
What's that?
We've asked for it. They're not happy to give it
Yeah,
to us.
I'll help you get it. Is TLC here? There's a representative from TLC. It's very easy. We send people down there with, well, you have to bring your hard drive down there, right? It's,
Yeah, I mean, we give the data out freely as a FOIA request. I don't know
Yeah.
who you're speaking with, but we can get you in touch with the right people.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Oh, okay. You might want to get his card before you go too. Actually, back then it was a little bit more difficult to get. Now it's easy. It's we had contracts with the vendors, and they would guard the data zealously. In fact, politically speaking, at the time I went out of my way, and I was actually, and they hate me for this too. The New York Civil Liberties Union. I brought them in early on because I knew they had complaints, and I made an agreement where our contract would restrict the use of the data. That is one of the reasons why we couldn't give everything out to everybody, because we didn't have the right to get it from the private vendors at the time. And we limited what we could get in the contract for political reasons. I didn't want people and the drivers to think we're going to watch them. So I cut a deal with the NYCLU and the drivers groups, and of course they came at the public hearing two years later and said, well, we object. I said, well, I have a letter here that says that you're okay with it, and they got really angry with me. But long story short is that it's available, you can get it, you can't just like get an email, you have to go down there with like a big hard drive, and it's a lot of data. But also just call me too, we have not the most updated, but we have it in the CUNY supercomputer, we're happy to share it and go over it with you and work with you on it. It's great stuff. Yes?
Hi. I have a quick question regarding TPAP.
Yes.
So you mentioned it's all these different sort of components that come together. When you procured it, was it for multiple vendors and then you worked on integrating it together, or can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, we actually thought, we went back and forth. Do we get an exclusive vendor? Do we allow everybody to do it? The biggest mistake I ever made, and I learned from it, was when we did a pilot, we let everybody come in. So, of course, we had a couple of shoddy products that had some really annoying video loops with people saying things. You may remember, well, you may not, but there's some people may remember something called the talking taxi. Okay, there was a taxi that used to talk to you, telling you to buckle up your seatbelt years ago. And people didn't like some of the voices. I think, quite frankly, Elmo was the straw that broke the camel's back, telling you to buckle up. But that killed it because we had no control over the quality of the product. By just saying, here are some basic specs and meet it, it ended up being a PR disaster. I was on TV trying to explain how this is a pilot program. Well, the thing stinks. We regrouped. 2 years later, we did it right. And we had a big debate upon exclusivity. And we knew that the owners were going to object to the price because they object to all types of additional increases. And we knew the drivers were going to object. So we had to do it this way. And thankfully, the procurement rules were changed a couple of years earlier under the administration to make it easy to do something like this. This was a very innovative thing. I mean, I think, you know, the Samusa contract is somewhat similar. You know, it's called an innovative procurement. Money doesn't change hands with the city. So we went back and forth on it, and I think the question was about how do we integrate it? You know, the integration of technology was easy. To be honest with you, people came forward. It was easy to put the whole thing together. What wasn't easy was the actual process of testing it to make sure that it was foolproof. We had hired consultants and folks that tried to hack into the system and tried to, you know, corrupt it. And that was the hard part, and it took some time. But it was a process, so it took 2 years to do. Washington, D.C. recently tried to go with an exclusive vendor, and it led to just a complete disaster. You know, there were protests that were filed, and the mayor was who I met with at the time, he was very angry. You know, he threw the whole thing out. He just wanted to get credit cards in the cabs by the time of the inauguration. Well, that time has come and gone. And long story short is that's the only time someone tried to do an exclusive vendor for the TPEP, and it failed. And you know, now there's a bunch of competitors out there, and they're going at each other's throats. And Philadelphia was a dispatch system. It was a little bit different. But I think, you know, I like the model of having competition. It drove the prices down. It held people honest. And we always knew, like, there could be maybe just 1 or 2 companies left standing. I'm incredibly uncomfortable as a former regulator having a situation where you're beholden to one entity. Okay, and even when the taxi tomorrow, before look, I'm responsible for having exclusivity as an option. I mean, it wasn't up to me. My successor picked one, but I thought exclusivity was the only way that you can interest the manufacturer in producing a purpose-built vehicle. So it's a public policy debate. It's a big decision. But what happens when it fails? You know, where are you going to go? My biggest thing that kept me up at night at the time was what happens if this contractor, you know, screws up the data or something happens with the credit cards, and then we have a disaster. There's nobody else to go to. So that's why we chose that model.
All right.
Okay. Whoever's got the microphone has the first.
I don't know. I'll go ahead and shoot from there. Quick question: will this data be integrable with 511 going forward?
I'm sorry, with what? With
511.
I don't see any reason why it can't be. I don't know if there are any plans to do that, but I don't see why it couldn't. Yes.
Okay, my question is, just now you mentioned the importance of GPS in the system, but GPS seems doesn't work well in the city. When I drive in the city, well, my GPS keep telling me recalculating. So, and I noticed that most taxi drivers, they don't use GPS, they just know how to get there.
Well, look, the GPS, GPS wasn't even a consideration back in the 90s. I mean, the canyon effect was pronounced. You know, now with triangulation, it's a lot different. It's still not 100% exact, but the system catches up. For purposes of GPS and data, it's not going to be real time necessarily. It could be off by a couple of seconds, but it catches up. The data eventually comes through when the cab moves into another location. So for purpose of credit card processing and other types of application, but look, GPS, it's better to have it and maybe be a little bit late. But what I do have a problem with is a smartphone, okay, that's serving as a meter. I think in time the technology will get there. I'm on a working group with the National Conference of Weights and Measures and the National Institute for Standards and Technology. And we are working with them vociferously to try to get a smartphone app that has time and distance that's approved, okay, for use, so we can get rid of these clunky old meters that haven't changed in like 100 years. Yes?
Yes, Matt. Felisa Vasquez from Hunter College, Computer Science.
Good to see you.
So, yeah, good to see you too.
You were the one in my office about a year and a half ago.
So my question today is the following. Some of the current apps that you talked about are about the taxi companies, and what they want to do is, for example, the smart taxi that you talked about. Taxis being directed to places where they most likely are going to get a good fare, so that they're going to maximize their profit, individual ride profits. The smart apps that you talked about is about the individual people trying to get the taxi that is more convenient for them. Now, the San Francisco model is one where all the data from the service providers and from the customers is coming into the cloud. Whose profit is being regulated there?
Well,
What do you think, who do you think should regulate the cloud? Because the algorithms are very different if they're run by companies than if they're run by public service.
Well, I think that's a big issue that is going to be dealt with in a lot of other contexts over the next couple of years outside of this taxi issue. I mean, everything's going into the cloud now, and they have these server farms, and I think it's just a matter of time before there's some problem, okay, where one of these server farms has an issue, and they're probably more secure than having a big server in somebody's building somewhere. But who's going to regulate it from the taxi context? It's going to be the regulator who's responsible, and their private contractor that they contracted with, who's overseeing this in the software. And who's going to benefit? It depends. I think at the end of the day, the passengers benefit, potentially. If it works the way it says it's supposed to work, that means you'll have a better chance of getting a cab. What we're hearing right now, the complaints that are being out there, is that the dispatch companies feel that they're going to lose their business to these and facilitate these new startup apps that are just going to come in and steal the data from their fleets. That's a big issue, whether private companies are going to be able to get access to the fleet data of their competitors. That is really the big issue that's being discussed. I think it's all going to work out, and reasonable minds will prevail, but I think the security of the data is key. And I think the regulator needs to make sure that people have confidence that when they take a cab, all their information is not going to end up with people that they never anticipated. Those are the challenges. But the greater good is that it's not just about service. The wealth of possibilities, we can protect the comfort level. And again, big difference between legal privacy rights and a person's comfort level. Okay, we need to have these systems in place where a person's identity is blacked out and we are just looking at dots on a map. But why should we have that data? It's going to make transportation better, smoother, people's lives better. And most importantly, with San Francisco, what I like is that taxis are being respected for the first time ever. They are part of an intermodal mix, which has been absent for the last, since we've been riding around on horses and steamships and rail. Taxis have been like, the unappreciated child of the transportation system because they're different, because they're private, because they're not getting public funding. All right, well now I think people like Ed Reskin and Chris Hayashi and the people that are running the show over at MTA in San Francisco, I think they got a great idea. It's controversial. I believe ultimately more cities around the country and the world are going to be doing things like this. Maybe not the exact same thing, maybe not a dispatch system, but we need to control these apps, in my opinion. The apps are running wild. It's like apps run wild is what it is. They're all over the place. There's they feel that regulation should not apply to them, and I beg to differ with them. I think you need to have some basic regulations and a level playing field. And what's even more disturbing is these ride-sharing apps, which I don't want to get too much into, but ride-sharing apps are complete deregulation. You have these apps that are out there that basically say, oh, we're going to pay drivers through advertising revenue or as an optional tip, which is nonsense. There's no optional tips, okay? This is a suggested tip, and if you don't tip, you're out of the group. It's glorified hitchhiking, and this is scary that, if you have children that are at a college campus somewhere and they're hooking up with these strangers, you don't know what's going to happen. Bad things happen when you get into cars with strangers, okay, who haven't been vetted with criminal background checks and drug testing, and it's just a matter of time, unfortunately, before something bad happens. Why they're doing it? It's the newest fad, it's the newest thing. Of course, it came out of San Francisco once again. It's new, it's cool, it's exciting. At the end of the day, what's cool and exciting is not necessarily what's efficient, what's right, and what's safe. And at the end of the day, I think it's all going to go to the wayside. I do believe apps will stay, and it'll all settle down, but they're going to have to be integrated. They can't be running wild. Okay, they're all going to be, all their APIs are going to be shared, and there's going to be a regulator controlling them, and I think that's the future. And I represent the regulators. They like the concept. They want it. Okay, a lot of them want it. And San Francisco, I have to say, was really bold on this one. One could argue that they created the issue and created the problem, now they're trying to solve it. But I do believe that Ed Reskin is incredibly innovative for doing this as a public transit official, okay, who's responsible for all these other modes. Too often, it's a mode that's been overlooked, and now it's being integrated, and I'm very happy about that. I'm sorry.
Hi.
I think the other one, yeah.
Oh, hi.
Who's got, oh, hello.
Hi. My name is Marsha.
Hi,
Professor
Marsha.
Gaunt, and I work for the MTA, and I have a question regarding the broker service. You said you
Sure.
worked on the pilot program. I'm actually trying to gather some information about that broker service. Just wondering if you were able to help paratransit collect the trip data that the broker service puts together. I know they have their own admin and they have their own systems, but I'm finding that paratransit is not collecting the trip data.
Yeah, I actually just met with Tom Charles the other day to talk about this issue. I'm doing a study, a US DOT funded study on showing how, like I mentioned before, using more liveries or taxi cabs can actually lead to a reduced environmental footprint and also lead to massive savings. This concept all started when Lee Sander, who's the former MTA chair, he was on my board at TLC for many, many years. And when he left and went to MTA, we had lunch and we were trying to figure out how we're going to work together. And someone brought to my attention, and you may have heard of this, that there was a $60 million contract with a black car limousine company to pick up stranded accessoride passengers because the system, when it broke down and someone was left on a street corner in a wheelchair, had no place to go. So you taxpayers, okay, are paying over $150 or $100 per ride because accessorides screwed up with their system. I thought that was outrageous. Even though $60 million is a drop in a bucket when it comes to city budgets, I thought that was outrageous. We sat down, we started collaborating, and we decided let's do a pilot that's going to use yellow cabs and liveries to go point to point. Because the problem is that depending on the luck of the draw at the time of day, even the best of computer systems, if you're trying to manage people in different areas that are going to common destinations, a van that's picking up multiple passengers is not as efficient as one person in one cab going a direct route. And it's also cheaper. The average trip is over, I think, $60 or something for a van. Only 1.5, maybe 2 passengers go in each van on average. And the yellow cabs are a heck of a lot cheaper. You know, it's like more like, the cost is more like $12 or $15, actually $30 or something like that. I forget. $20. It's a huge difference. From $60 to $20 is money that is our money, okay? Taxpayers that's being wasted. I think this is a great idea. We did 2 things. Number one, we did a pilot program where we gave, using TPEP, we gave credit cards, or prepaid credit cards through MTA to people who are subscription users, and they would use cabs in Manhattan. So as a disabled individual, you know, with Accessoride, you'd have to decide to go to the movies. There's no spur of the moment for you. You can't decide, I just feel like going to the movies tonight. You know, you have to decide that 2 days ago or a day before. Now that for people under this pilot where cabs usually go in Manhattan, that is something that is a possibility. The other thing is the broker contract, which you're referring to, is something which was part of a pilot, but now there's an RFP which hasn't yet been finalized. The RFP's out, but the contract is not in place yet, where several companies are going to bid to be a broker that will have the dispatch system so that when Accessoride users need to go where they need to go, this broker will coordinate the transportation, either using their own vehicles, accessible or not, or contracting or subcontracting with others. So, but the concept is to use liveries or black car services or sedans instead of the vans. And I think the results of the study that we're doing, and the administrator of RITA was in our office last year, they're very excited about this because now Congress, who may be questioning where is all, you know, we're cutting the budget left and right, we got sequesters, why are we spending money on transportation research? What is coming out of it? Well, this is something that's positive. This is something that's going to help the environment when we're done with this study, but it's also going to actually, it's going to save billions of dollars. And the second we get this study done, I'm going to go on a road trip and make sure that everyone at TRB and everyone in Congress, you know, gets every MTA to do what they're doing here in New York.
Also, I mentioned before, there is a problem with paratransit not collecting that paratransit, I mean, the data that the broker has when they schedule the trips.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also an issue with TLC regulations and paratransit regulations. Basically, I handle some complaints from users, and they're saying that TLC drivers don't know the rules to handle paratransit accessory customers?
Well, TLC's in the house, so you guys can talk. But I think, I think that's a question of, I know there are training programs that were offered, okay? And a lot of them were done by East of Seals and they were voluntary. I do believe that they do cover it in taxi school. But I believe that what you should do, and I'll tell this to Tom as well, and I'm sure he's doing this, in the contracts, you need to delineate that in the contracts very specifically. You need to require the training. You need to make sure, not make the mistake I made, get all the data that MTA wants from those brokers when you draft that contract. Don't leave anything for question. I knew I wasn't getting this data because politically I couldn't ask for a lot of the data and not, we wanted to avert the lawsuit and just get this in the vehicle for passengers. But it's a little bit different accessoride. I believe that you should get everything that you can up front in that contract, and whatever you ask for, they'll give it to you. They're anxious to get moving. There are a couple, I know some of the people that are doing it, I know some of the people that bid on it, good companies. At the end of the day, it's a good idea, whoever gets the contract. And I believe it's the future. And technology is going to help. MTA is also working on an app for disabled passengers, or is exploring and looking into it. A disabled passenger should have an app to be able to get accessoride from wherever they are. Why should they have to, go back home or, find a phone? So I think apps are going to be the future for public transit too, and I think accessoride should have an app. And they are. They're working on it.
Can we save the other questions to other presenters, or do you have a
Yes.
question that you have to ask this speaker?
I have quick questions.
Okay.
This is the last question. I'll be around, so we can hang out, and I have cards and, an email address and a phone and everything.
My name is Zhang Yang Zhang from College Staten Island. My question is, speaking of
Just you and Professor Peters over there.
future of the transportation, would you like to share your view? Is it possible that self-navigated vehicle can be used in the taxi fleet? If the technology mature enough, what kind of a legal policy issues? And is the MTA have a group right now looking forward to study the policies or not? Thank you.
Actually, this is an issue that I debate in class with my students as well. I have some students who wrote papers on this stuff. The Google, driverless vehicle. Is it possible technologically? Can it work? Absolutely. So can those cool-looking glasses work. But whether people are going to actually, I can tell you, I'm never getting in a driverless vehicle. That's just me. And I think, could it happen one day that we have a system like the Jetsons where people are like in the sky and it could happen, but we're not there yet. I think the biggest problem is not whether it can be done and whether it's legal, okay? And a lot of times it's people's comfort level. I once saw a show, Discovery Channel, whatever it was, where they actually described in tedious detail what the human brain does, which is the most magnificent computer that exists on the planet, when you are driving a vehicle. It's amazing. I don't know if you saw it, but it's amazing. Replicating that in a computer, the fast reactions that humans have evolved to be able to handle, I just don't see that happening. And even if you could do it, which I think technology, if it works correctly, can do that. Look, airplanes fly on their own, okay, for the most part. Not to begrudge pilots, we still need pilots, okay, even though a lot of what they're doing is technologically, just monitoring once they're up in the air. Like Sully landing the plane. You need to have that human there. I know that passengers would feel uncomfortable about it. Think about whatever happened to the conductorless train. Remember that experiment? People were not comfortable with it. It's a comfort level thing. Just like the privacy issue with smartphones. But I do believe that people are going to get over the Big Brother aspect over time. We've already over it in a lot of ways. I think gradually that's going to change. But a driverless vehicle, I don't know. I wouldn't go in one. I'm around. I'll be hanging out. So if you have any questions, I look forward to your other presentations. And thank you for inviting me. This is a great day.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.